Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kiorkof, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're going to be talking about my running back tier list for the 2020 fantasy football season. On today's episode, I'm going to be talking about 40-plus running backs and giving you guys my subjective evaluations on each of these running backs based on what they've done in the past or what their potential is going into the 2020 season. I'll break it down in a tier list. For those of you who aren't familiar, again, a tier list kind of just breaks down the value of a player and kind of groups them together in terms of what I personally believe they're going to produce this upcoming season or their viability this upcoming season. Hopefully this helps you guys out for this coming weekends or the following weekend's draft. I know many of you are drafting as late as you possibly can in order to make sure that you're not, swayed with injuries or, anything outside of the realm of football potentially impeding on your fantasy team. So again, hopefully this is perfectly on time to help you guys out this upcoming weekend. If you like these kind of videos, make sure you click the like button down below. You guys have been great in the last couple of days, in the last week, smashing that like button. If we can get this video past 300 likes, I'd easily put out a wide receiver one for those of you who are interested. Outside of that, while you're down there, if you're new to the community, click the subscribe button. I'll be creating fantasy football content here for the entirety of the 2020 season, whether it's off-season content or going into the regular season with weekly rankings. All of that will be included. For those of you who are looking for more content, go down in the description. You can find my Patreon, patreon.com/AndrewKiorkof. There and at the website down below, AndrewKiorkof.com, you can find my 2020 fantasy football draft guide, which basically will give you the full rankings of what you're going to see on screen. As of right now, we're just talking about tier list. This is not going to be rankings in order. This is just going to be subjective tier list based rankings out of order, just kind of giving you guys my thought process on who is within each other's valuations. All right, so like I mentioned, I'm ready to talk running backs. Hopefully you guys are ready. I'm going to be talking about them little by little. I don't want to take 5 hours because I truly could sit here for 5 hours and legitimately talk about all 40 of these running backs, 45 running backs plus. But I can't do that. And I know many of you have other things to do, and I have other things to do. So at this moment in time, I'm just going to give you guys a couple words of my opinion on them. Some players will get a little bit more, backing in terms of their statistics. But again, ultimately, I am where I am at this. Subject to change, obviously, rankings up here. These aren't really rankings, but all of these tier lists are subject to change. If something happens in terms of an injury, a player, getting traded, all that kind of stuff, that will just change these tiers. But again, those are ever changing over there on my Patreon. Regardless, let's go ahead and let's start by talking about Christian McCaffrey. Again, it's not really a surprise that he's the number one. It's actually just the obvious fact at this moment in time. But either way, just talking about Christian McCaffrey, his potential this upcoming season. He had the third greatest fantasy football running back season of all time last year. He's averaged 25.3 fantasy points per game in the last 24 games he's played in the National Football League, going back to 2018, the midway point. Last season, he had 11 games of 6+ receptions. He had 5 games of 10+ receptions. He didn't have I think he had only 2 performances of less than 19 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format last year. And he broke his own record for the most receptions for a running back in a single season with 116 last year. In 2018, he'd broken Matt Forte's record. He went ahead and shattered his own record this past season. He gets an improved quarterback, improved offense, a new coach that's, heavily offensive minded to an extent. And to be honest, it's no surprise that Christian McCaffrey is in the S tier. To be honest, some would say that Christian McCaffrey is on a tier in his own. But unfortunately, we don't have enough room. We've already broken down 10 tiers here, and Christian McCaffrey will have to share the spotlight with a couple extra guys. Speaking of some of these extra guys, we're talking about Saquon Barkley, the man on the thumbnail, because Saquon Barkley, far and away, is an S-tier running back. He's proven to us over the last couple seasons that he is capable of being one of the, if not the best, National Football League running back. In 2018, 2,000 all-purpose yards, 91 receptions, 15 total touchdowns. And sure, last season, we didn't see that, mainly because of his injury. But even with his injury, if he had played a full 16-game season, even though he struggled here and there, he still would have finished as the number 5 overall running back in a half PPR scoring setting. Saquon Barkley is capable. We've seen his ceiling. We know what he's capable of. And ultimately, this upcoming season will be a defining year. With the offense, with more experience at the quarterback position, better offensive linemen. You drafted 2 offensive linemen, one in the first round, one in the third round. You got yourself a pretty advantageous position for Saquon Barkley. Hopefully he can act upon it and deliver some great fantasy performances for all of us. Moving on, we're talking about the third running back and the last running back of the S tier, in my opinion. We're talking about Ezekiel Elliott. Ezekiel Elliott, like I've mentioned before, I put out a video a couple weeks back talking about his consistency and the fact that he's been the most consistent running back over the past 4 seasons. Again, in the last 4 seasons of his career, he's averaged 19.2 fantasy points per game in a half PPR scoring setting. If he had not been suspended for the last 6 games of the 2017 season, he would have probably finished as a top 5 back every single season of his career in fantasy football, because he's done that on a yearly basis. On top of it, he's the only running back in the past 4 seasons to have 26 100-yard rushing games. He's had 26 100-yard rushing games in 56 total regular season games. I mean, it's a 50% chance that this dude's ripping off for 100. If your league has that kind of a bonus, I mean, it's just paying dividends, to be honest. But those are my S-tier running backs. These are all guys that are going to be involved in the passing game, that are getting 300 touches on the ground, are far and away the only running backs on their respective teams taking goal line touches, and they are the most talented at the position. There are some other guys that are going to be in this A tier that are going to be vying for these S tier spots next season. But at this moment in time, I think, considering these guys are typically coming off the board 1, 2, 3, it's not a surprise that they are currently in the S tier. Let's go ahead and move on. Let's talk about our next tier on hand. Again, these are completely out of order, but we will start with King Henry, Derrick Henry. The production that Derrick Henry had last season, prior and after the implementation of Ryan Tannehill in this offense, was substantial. I mean, from weeks 7 through 17 of last year, Derrick Henry was the number 2 overall back amongst all running backs in that time span, and was averaging 22.3 fantasy points per game on average in a half PPR scoring format. He had 4.18 yards per carry after contact, had 42 rushes of 10 plus rushing yards, 9 rushes of 20 plus rushing yards, and was the 4th most elusive running back in the National Football League last year, according to Pro Football Focus. All in all, Derrick Henry was a monster. He had 3 games back to back in the playoffs of 30 plus carries. I mean, he far and away is the monster of this league. If anything, Derrick Henry could potentially be in this S tier this upcoming season. I just want to see some more work in the passing game. And I'm hoping that's going to happen this year, because, again, he does deserve to be in that S tier. If and when Dion Lewis, now that he's gone over to the New York Giants. Now that he's gone, hopefully Derrick Henry is going to get some more utilization in the passing game, besides the couple screen passes he gets in every game. Otherwise, again, he's not going to be as high upside if he doesn't get those 16 touchdowns, 12 touchdowns a year, which he should be in line for, again. But all in all, he's a fantastic running back, one of the most talented in the National Football League, and an A-tier running back, to say the very least. Moving on, let's talk about our next running back amongst the A-tier. We're talking about Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Now, when we talk about Derrick Henry took 4 years to have his huge breakout year, and we're already anticipating Clyde Edwards-Helaire to have his breakout year 1 with the Kansas City Chiefs. He has been the talk of the town in terms of fantasy football, and it's mainly because of what is, in line for him in terms of opportunity in this offense. I mean, the Chiefs last year gave their running backs 311 total rushing attempts, had 110 targets towards the running back position, 57 red zone rushing attempts, 16 attempts inside the 5-yard line on the goal line. Now, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, sure, he's a smaller back, but there is not any competition in his backfield now that Damian Williams has opted out. Sure, a lot of people want to talk about DeAndre Washington, but I'm not too worried about that. The fact that Clyde Edwards-Helaire is a dynamic 3-down back, and on top of it, last time we saw a 3-down back in this offense was Kareem Hunt, and he averaged 18 fantasy points per game in his career with the 27 games he played with the Kansas City Chiefs. That's what we expect from a guy like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and that is why he is amongst the A-tier running backs going into this upcoming season. Let's go ahead and move on. Let's talk about another running back who now is going into his 2nd year, and though his rookie season was cut short, another one of these Alabama running backs that has taken over the National Football League, Josh Jacobs, was incredible last year. I mean, he broke many rookie records, and unfortunately, sure, his season was cut short, but if he had not gotten injured and played a full 16-game season, he would have finished as the number 9 running back. Similar to Derrick Henry, I'm hoping that there is a potential for a running back like Josh Jacobs to step up and become a productive part of this offense in the passing game. I know they bring in Theo Riddick, they have Jalen Richard. Josh Jacobs has said publicly he wants to catch 60 balls in a season. And sure, that might not be a possibility, but I'm hoping he could potentially get to the 40 catches this upcoming season, increase his value in a half or full PPR setting, and be an incredible running back. According to Pro Football Focus last year, he was the most elusive back amongst all capable and eligible running backs with 69 avoided tackles on the ground. I mean, that in itself, absolutely ridiculous. Moving on, we're talking about the next running back in this A tier, the penultimate running back here, Dalvin Cook. Now, Dalvin Cook should be an S-tier running back But my only concern with Dalvin Cook is his injury history, and if in fact he can stay healthy this upcoming season. He has not played a full season throughout his entire career. His rookie season out of FSU, tore an ACL. The season prior in 2018, hamstring injuries that plagued him, and he also had to share snaps with Latavius Murray. This past season, from weeks 1 through 11, prior to getting injured, he was averaging 23.5 touches per game. And on top of it, if he had stayed healthy it was 23.5 touches per game and 21.43 fantasy points per game. If he had stayed healthy and played a full 16-game season at that pace, he would have been the number 2 running back behind Christian McCaffrey. I mean, he would have probably produced 340 plus points at the pace he was currently at. On top of it, Dalvin Cook, in his 21 games that he's played 60+% of the snap share, he's averaged 17.43 attempts, 5.05 targets, 4.1 receptions, 118.7 yards per game, and 0.71 touchdowns per game on average. Dalvin Cook's a monster. If he stays healthy, he is obviously the workhorse of this team, can get it done in the passing game, on the ground for sure with his running offensive line, and everything kind of looking towards him having another great season here. Moving on. We talk about the last running back in the A tier, Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara, if he had not gotten injured last year, would have probably been a top 5 back, and in that would have potentially been in the S tier of players because of the fact that he is such a valuable asset in the passing game. But in a half PPR setting, that number is a little bit, scaled down. In the last 3 seasons, Alvin Kamara has surpassed 81 receptions per season. I think it's 81 receptions per season in the last 3 years. I mean, the fact that he's done that number is kind of ridiculous. On top of it, last year he had 11 games of 5+ receptions. Those are the numbers you want to see. In his career, he's finished as the number 3 back, the number 4 back, and just this past year, the number 12 back. Unfortunately, due to his health concerns and everything that he had to deal with last year, he missed some time. And Latavius Murray absolutely picked up the slack and dominated with that. But coming into the 2020 season, fully healthy, with one of the most talented offensive lines in the National Football League, we have Alvin Kamara in a situation where it's his job. He's got to be able to take it by the horns and absolutely produce on a weekly basis, which I expect to see from him. It's just a matter of time until he does so. Moving on. Let's talk about our next running backs in the B tier. Now, these are guys that are still in the top 12, running back conversation. We've only mentioned 8 total running backs, so the rest of these guys are in that top 12 conversation. Let's start off with Austin Eckler. Again, I'm wearing a Chargers shirt, so let's start off with a guy that I am a huge fan of this upcoming season. I mean, let's not forget what he was able to produce last year. Without Melvin Gordon in the lineup, he was playing 71% of the snaps. He was averaging 23.75 fantasy points per game in that 4-game stretch without Melvin Gordon. Even when Melvin Gordon returned, he was still averaging 14 fantasy points per game in a half PPR setting with 51% of the snaps. If in fact Justin Jackson produces this season as the number 2 running back of this team, regardless of what Justin Jackson does, Austin Eckler is far too valuable of a prospect in this offense to be ignored. I know a lot of people are worried about the quarterback situation. I think he's far beyond that. He is going to get the ample amount of work, the touches. It's all going to be there for him this upcoming season. He's an extremely talented back and the lead back of this team from here on out. Should be a great play and pick up this year. Moving on, let's talk about Nick Chubb. Prior to the last 15 minutes of Week 17 on Sunday, Nick Chubb was slated to be the running, champion of 2019. He was going to have the most rushing yards in the year, but Derrick Henry had to bust off a 200-yard game. But regardless, Nick Chubb is one of the best running backs in the National Football League. On top of the fact that, sure, there's going to be some conversations about with and without Kareem Hunt. Without Kareem Hunt, he was averaging 17.5 points. With Kareem Hunt, it was like 12.5 points. There's a 5-point difference there. Now, the fact of the matter is, this entire offense is going to change. I blame Freddie Kitchens on anything that led to Nick Chubb's decline last season. I think Kevin Stefanski coming into this offense, bringing in that Minnesota Vikings approach where they're going to run the ball down defenders' throats. The fact that you bring in Andy Janovich, the fullback from Denver, you bring in Jack Conklin, the right tackle from Tennessee, you draft Jedrick Wills, the left tackle. You have yourself an offense that wants to pound the rock, and they're going to do that this year. Nick Chubb is going to be that hammer, and everybody else is going to be the nail. Moving on, let's talk about Aaron Jones, the running back that finishes the number 2 overall guy last year because he scored 19 touchdowns. And I know a lot of people are thinking, can I trust Aaron Jones? Absolutely. because Aaron Jones, even if he had scored 9 less touchdowns last year, would have still finished as the number 9 running back in a half PPR. There are no offensive threats in this offense that are going to subtract away from Aaron Jones' touches and attempts and opportunity. Sure, a lot of people are looking at the potential of A.J. Dillon. I'm not too worried about that, and I don't think you should be either. At this moment in time, Aaron Jones is going to be probably the second leading receiving option of this offense, because outside of Devontae Adams, there's nothing else. Alan Lazard, what is it, Marquez Valdez-Scantling? I mean, what are we doing? The Packers have obviously gone ahead and they've established that they don't need a second receiving option in terms of wide receiver position. So now we have Aaron Jones feasting. He will once again do that this upcoming season. Moving on. Joe Mixon. Now, Joe Mixon kind of drops a little bit because he could potentially be in this 8th tier. And I think a lot of these guys could flex into different tiers. But at this moment in time, with the contract situation, with his migraines, with the fact that I don't know what kind of Joe Mixon we're going to get to start this season. Joe Mixon is an incredible running back. He's going into his 4th year again. He wants a new contract. Prior to Week 8, Joe Mixon was one of the worst running backs in the National Football League because he wasn't given the ample opportunity. But once he was given the ample opportunity, from weeks 8 through 17 of last year, he averaged 17.01 fantasy points per game on 21.56 rushing attempts per game and increased a 10% snap count base in those weeks. With opportunity comes success in the National Football League. I'm hoping Joe Mixon's contract gets settled and everything like that is dealt with, because he is probably the top tier of this B tier if, in fact, everything is going in his direction. With the improvement at quarterback, with the improvement in offensive line with the Cincinnati Bengals, we have ourselves a very good chance of Joe Mixon having an incredible season in 2020. Moving on. Next running back on hand, Kenyon Drake. Kenyon Drake's an interesting prospect. We've seen him with the walking boot in the last couple of days. He says it's just precautionary. And to be honest, I'm okay with that. Let it be. Kenyon Drake last year, once he left the Miami Dolphins offense and was finally home free to be in a productive offense that wanted to give him the ball on a consistent basis, he was incredible. From weeks 9 through 17 of last season, he averaged 18.175 fantasy points per game. He was a monster on the ground through the air. And once he fills in for David Johnson, David Johnson, prior to leaving the Cardinals, was averaging 17 points per game at the running back position. The running back position of the Cardinals is extremely valuable because they're going to score touchdowns, they're going to get 60-plus receptions, and they're going to get opportunities on the ground. I think Kenyon Drake is in line for that this upcoming season. Should be fantastic. Moving on. Let's talk about Miles Sanders. Now, Miles Sanders is in an interesting situation. He's been injured in the last couple weeks, and that's fine. But the fact that his offensive line is slowly falling apart is a concern. I had a concern about Brandon Brooks getting injured earlier this offseason with the Achilles. And now that Andre Dillard, the left tackle, is out for the season, or they're contemplating whether he can potentially come back, they're in some trouble. Sure, they still have Jason Peters on roster. He was slated to play right guard. He's going to go back to left tackle. He was one of the best pass blocking left tackles last season, and he's got a lot of experience under his belt and knows this offense. But they are still going to struggle at offensive line, because outside of Kelsey, Peters, and Lane Johnson, their guard positions are bare. They don't have Halaputi Vaitai. I don't even know how to pronounce his name, but I'm close. I'm pretty close, guys. I'm pretty close. And they don't have Brandon Brooks, and now they don't have Andre Dillard. They're down a couple offensive linemen, and that's going to hurt this year. But regardless, last year when Miles Sanders was finally given the opportunity, when you go back and you look at what Miles Sanders produced last year, he only played 52% of the offensive snaps. But when he was given the opportunity, from weeks 11 through 16, he played 77% of the snap counts and averaged 16.67 fantasy points per game. We know what he's capable of, and if in fact given the opportunity, he could definitely take advantage of it. Moving on, let's talk about our next tier. David Johnson. I just mentioned him earlier before when I talked about Kenyon Drake, because again, David Johnson, he finds a new home in Houston this year, but we've seen him be an incredible back. He's been the number 1 overall running back in 2016 when he almost had, he definitely had over 2,000 all-purpose yards, but he had 800 receiving yards, over 1,000 rushing yards. He almost had one of those 1,000 seasons in the National Football League, which Christian McCaffrey just accomplished. David Johnson is a very talented back. He is not that old. A lot of people see his injury from last year and just want to write him off. The fact of the matter is, prior to him getting injured, from weeks 1 through 6, he was averaging 17.72 fantasy points per game. He joins an offense in which he's going to have the starting role, potentially 3-down back role. David Johnson's in a pretty good position this year. Moving on. Let's talk about Todd Gurley. Speaking of having a pretty good position and finding a new home, Todd Gurley will be behind a better offensive line, sure. He's going to be losing the opportunity that he got with the Los Angeles Rams, which was 10 plus touchdowns a year guaranteed, had the most rushing attempts inside the 5-yard line amongst all running backs in the past 4 seasons, was getting passing work beyond, his wildest dreams, 50 plus catches a year prior in 2018 and 2017. Todd Gurley was a monster, and all of us remember him for being a monster. But with all the knee issues, the potential of him not, touching the ball 20 plus times a game and not being a workhorse back, that is scary. I'm hoping that in this offense, he could be what the Falcons need. Devontae Freeman has not been that in the last couple of years, considering his injury history. If we can get Todd Gurley with a full 16-game season here, he could be an extremely valuable prospect, and especially at his current value. Moving on, let's talk about another running back. Again, this C-tier running back list, all these guys I've pretty much talked about on player profile videos. So if you want an extended look at them, you can go find those videos on the channel. Regardless, Leonard Fournette caught the ball 76 times last year. He had 6 games of 19 plus carries. And in those games, he averaged 21.17 fantasy points per game. The touches are going to be there. He is a workhorse back. The question is, what can we rely in terms of the Jaguars offense? Can we really rely upon a running back that's going to be in negative game scripts when they're getting blown out because their defense is not capable of, hanging in on games? Even with that being the case, if Leonard Fournette continues to get the work that he's been getting in the passing game, I expect him to be just as valuable of a running back, if not more valuable in PPR settings, because of his opportunity in the passing game, his ability to make plays after the catch. That in itself, for a bruising running back, which a lot of people anticipate, all he does is, lower his shoulder and blow people. No, he makes them miss. He has breakaway runs. He is a ultimate running back in terms of the National Football League. He stayed healthy last year. That's a great sign. Hopefully he does it again this year. Moving on. Le'Veon Bell. Le'Veon Bell is an interesting prospect because, again, similar to a Leonard Fournette, he's going to get a lot of work in the passing game. He's going to get 300 plus touches, but both of those guys did not have more than 3 rushing touchdowns last year, or 3 or 4 rushing touchdowns last year, and that's where it hurt them the most. If these two kind of running backs can get the goal line work and get the potential, then I'd be excited. But Le'Veon Bell plays with Adam Gase, and Adam Gase is a saboteur. He absolutely wants to sabotage his starting running backs at all times, whether it was Kenyon Drake back in Miami or Le'Veon Bell right now. Le'Veon Bell has to deal with Frank Gore, Kalen Ballage, rookie running backs being drafted, coming for his potential job and potentially cutting into his overall touches per game. And that in itself is a problem. We're already hearing complaints from Le'Veon Bell about him not getting enough touches at practice. Just wait till the games start. That in itself is an issue, but hopefully that won't be an issue this year, because if it's not, we have ourselves a pretty good running back here. Last season, he averaged 20.73 touches per game. If that stays in line, great. He had 6 games of 5 plus receptions. He had 8 games of 17 plus carries. In those games, he averaged 14.07 fantasy points per game. Moving on. Let's talk about our next running back on the list, Chris Carson. Chris Carson's been dealing with some family issues as of late. Hasn't been at practice. We know he's coming off of an injury in which it ended his 2019 season with the hip, but he didn't need surgery. He should be fine this year. Rashad Penny's still dealing with the ACL. Carlos Hyde is an insurance policy. We don't have to worry about that. Let's not forget that since week 3 of 2018, yes, 2018, week 3, the Dallas Cowboy game in 2018, that's the one I'm talking about. Yeah. Since then, Chris Carson has averaged 14.97 fantasy points per game for the Seattle Seahawks. Just kind of putting that in perspective. Either way, he's a monster back. He gets work in the passing game. He's in an offense that wants to run the ball first more than anything. And therefore, Pete Carroll is going to keep pounding the rock with Carson. He's going to be an incredible prospect this year. Moving on. Melvin Gordon, our final C-tier prospect going into today's list. Melvin Gordon, again, a very talented running back. Last season, from weeks 8 through 17, once he finally came back from his holdout and kind of found his stride within the Chargers offense, he was the number 8 overall back from weeks 8 through 17 in a half PPR scoring format, while Eckler was the number 10 overall back. They were sharing that backfield, and they were both dominating in fantasy. On top of it, last season was Melvin Gordon's worst year in terms of production, even in comparison to his rookie year. His rookie year didn't score a rushing touchdown, but his yard per carry average last year was horrible, 3.8 yards per carry. Now he goes into an offense with a far greater offensive line. In terms of overall improvement, it's going to be night and day for a running back like this, who's going to get the goal line work in an offense that wants to run the ball, and he's capable in the passing game, which we've seen Royce Freeman and Phillip Lindsay each have about 40 catches in each of the last 2 seasons. That in itself kind of leads me to think Melvin Gordon's got himself a pretty good situation there in Denver. Moving on, let's talk about our next tier of running backs, starting off with the 49ers running back, Raheem Mostert. I did make a video about him the other day. Again, a lot of these running backs I've talked about. You can find a video on the channel. If you've liked the video so far, click that like button. I really do appreciate it, guys. It would be great to see this numbers continue to rise. Subscribe to the channel. I just got to throw that out there. Anyway, we're talking about Raheem Mostert. Raheem Mostert's been a monster once he's given the opportunity. Of course, again, I'm going to say it again. Opportunity leads to success. From weeks 13 through 17 of last year, he averaged 17.56 fantasy points per game with a 59% snap count share and was the number 9 running back. We know what he did in the playoffs. He had that 200-yard game against the Packers, and he's in an offense that is even better this upcoming season in terms of run blocking. They got rid of Joe Staley. He retired. Not really getting rid of him. But you bring in Trent Williams, who's a monster, and then you go ahead and you improve a couple offensive pieces here and there at the right and left guard positions. You still have Kittle and Juszczyk. Raheem Mostert should be in line for another great year here. And the fact that he's going to have starting touches from week 1 leads me to believe that he's going to be able to continue to keep his job because he's just a monster. Moving on. Jonathan Taylor, looking all preppy and clean there from Wisconsin. Jonathan Taylor was a second-round pick for the Indianapolis Colts, and they didn't draft him to sit on the bench. They drafted him to come in and immediately produce in an offense that wants to run the ball. I mean, the Indianapolis Colts last season had the 5th most rushing attempts amongst all NFL teams last year. That in itself makes me think they want to run, especially the fact that they have the best run-blocking offensive line in the National Football League, on top of the fact that you're bringing in a Wisconsin running back. Let's remember, Wisconsin running backs typically have monster years, but Jonathan Taylor is one of a kind. In the last 3 years of Wisconsin, he surpassed over 6,000 rushing yards. 2,000 rushing yards each of the last 2 seasons and 1,900 back in 2017. He's a monster. He's going to win this job. It's only a matter of time until Marlon Mack is hoping, he gets a couple touches a game. All right, we go ahead and move on and we start talking about Mark Ingram, a guy that was a top 12 running back last year. And because of the fact that he's a part of the best offense in the National Football League, it had a lot to do with it. I mean, even with only 200 total rushing attempts and very limited work on in the passing game, he had a total of 15 touchdowns. Those 15 touchdowns boosted him to where he was at the end of the season. And sure, there were some games in which he was disappointing, but all in all, we're talking about the Ravens offense, who had the most rushing attempts, the most rushing yards, the second most rushing touchdowns. And in fact, I mean, even with Marshall Yanda retiring, they're going to have one of the better running offensive lines. All in all, Mark Ingram's in line to have another great season here because he sits next to Lamar Jackson, and the amount of pressure he's going to pull is just going to open up more opportunity for Mark Ingram to be a touchdown fiend later in the season. Moving on, talking about another running back, a guy that in the same division, we're talking about the AFC North. James Conner is a monster. We talked about him a little bit last week, but his only problem is injuries. If James Conner can stay healthy throughout his career, he could definitely be the starting running back of the Steelers for the next, coming years. And prior to his injury last year, even without Ben Roethlisberger in the lineup, from weeks 1 through 8, the 7 games he played, he was averaging 15.73 fantasy points per game and had caught 29 of his 31 total targets and was the number 9 running back from weeks 1 through 8 of last year. He was on pace to be a top 12 running back, but unfortunately, the injuries caught up with him. This upcoming season, with an improved offensive line, Ben Roethlisberger back, more experience at the wide receiver position, one of the best, if not the best defense in the National Football League, I think it all points in the direction of let's get Conner the ball and let's have him earn a contract this upcoming season because that's what's currently in line for him. Moving on, the last running back of this tier is David Montgomery. Now, I understand David Montgomery had a little bit of a groin situation a couple of days back and could miss the first week of the season, but we're just going to have to keep that up to date. But as of this moment in time, David Montgomery is a 1,000-yard running back. He's going to surpass 1,000 yards on the ground. I mean, Jordan Howard did it prior to him getting there. He's going to accomplish that this upcoming season. On top of that, he's a capable receiving back. All he needs is touchdown upside. He could easily get 7 touchdowns this upcoming season and be a top 24 running back at this moment in time with that offense, even with the struggles at quarterback and the offensive line position. Regardless, he's going to have the opportunity He just needs the nod from a guy like Matt Nagy. I mean, David Montgomery last season, when he was given the nod in games in which he was given 20 plus touches, he was a monster. I mean, when he was playing 65% of the when he was playing more than 65% of the snap share, he was averaging about 15.78 fantasy points per game in a half PPR scoring format. All in all, David Montgomery is a monster if, in fact, he's given the opportunity and if he stays healthy this year and comes back on time. Moving on. Talking about the E tier, Devin Singletary. I mean, the drop-off of tiers is not that wide, but Devin Singletary takes a little bit of a dip from me because, again, Zach Moss is coming. And Zach Moss is a guy that is going to potentially take his job, but we'll just have to wait and see. Devin Singletary is not a between-the-tackles runner, though he has been a great running prospect for this team last year. He had a couple games of 20-plus rushing attempts, averaging 4.5-plus yards per carry last year, broke over 100 yards in a single game. We've seen him do that, but he is primarily a receiving back, and that's where they want to use him, but also just kind of keep him as a hybrid overall running back. He's been a solid play, but his issue has been the touchdown upside. Once he was finally given the trust from this offense last year in week 9, he only scored 2 touchdowns from then on out, from weeks 9 through 17. That's mainly because of Josh Allen. If Josh Allen's going to keep vulturing touchdowns, Devin Singletary sits at this tier and doesn't really have the upside that we'd like him to have. Moving on. Let's talk about another receiving back that is primarily a receiver, James White. I know a lot of people think James White might not be as valuable as Devin Singletary, but in my eyes, he truly is. James White is going to be the Christian McCaffrey of this Patriots offense. I mean, that's what he's been over the last 2 seasons. I mean, 2018 had 87 receptions. 2019 had 72 receptions, even though he missed the game. All in all, he's going to catch the ball. And with the running back struggles, whether it's Sony Michel or it's Damian Harris or Rex Burkhead, Lamar Miller, it doesn't matter. James White's going to be on the field because he's the best receiving back on this team. And even then, he's going to have rushing attempts. He always does, and he always acts upon them. If, in fact, we're in a 2-minute drill, who's out on the field? It's James White. If we're down in the game, we need to come back. Who's on the field? It's going to be James White. He's going to be all over this offense. He's going to be one of Cam Newton's best friends in terms of the passing game. Should be a great prospect this year. Moving on. Kareem Hunt, another one of these pass-catching backs that has great potential upside. Since coming to the Cleveland Browns, I mean, he played 8 games last year. In those 8 games, was averaging 10 fantasy points per game, half PPR. He had 37 receptions on 44 total targets in 8 games. I mean, that's pretty much what? That's 4+ catches per game on average last year. In a PPR, half PPR setting, that is incredible value, on top of the fact that he's going to have opportunity to run the ball in an offense that is behind a great offensive line and fullback. The fact that you're going to have Jarvis Landry and Austin Hooper and Odell Beckham pulling attention away, on top of the fact that Nick Chubb can be in the backfield. Kareem Hunt is going to have a lot of success this year. He can, he could be that flex play that everybody wants this upcoming season. That's what he's kind of been throughout draft season. Regardless, moving on. Let's go ahead and talk about the next running back here on today's list, Ronald Jones. Now, Ronald Jones, even though a lot of people are worried about him, I have my concerns. But when you're a part of a Tom Brady offense, regardless of how bad you are at running back, just look at Sony Michel last year. Sony Michel was not a great running back last year, but he managed to find value because when you're associated with Tom Brady and you're scoring as much as you do, you are going to have opportunities down on the goal line. And I think Ronald Jones, with all the improvements he's made this offseason, I understand there's a lot of competition in this backfield with him, Derek Gumbawale, LaShawn McCoy, Keyshawn Devon, Ray Calais, the other rookie. There's going to be some competition there, but I'm hoping Ronald Jones takes that job and wins it. I know he showed many glimpses last year and couldn't break away from Peyton Barber, but maybe this is the year. Moving on. Talking about our next running back, we have a rookie on hand, and because of the situation that is going on at Rams camp currently, with Darrell Henderson, the second-year running back, being injured at this moment in time with a soft tissue injury to his hamstring/quad, the question remains, who is going to be the potential starting running back and fill for Todd Gurley? Because Todd Gurley is, again, leaving 250-plus touches on the board on top of 10-plus rushing touchdowns for the last 4 seasons. That in itself is an incredible opportunity for a running back, and I think Cam Akers out of Florida State University, despite how well he played behind one of the worst offensive lines in college, he's going to have to do the same thing with the Rams. The offensive line is lackluster, to say the least, and I'm a Rams fan, diehard. And the fact of the matter is that he's going to struggle if in fact they don't end up giving him great opportunities. I expect him to be a good running back. He's probably going to be the starter week 1 against the Dallas Cowboys. We're going to have to hope he wins the job there for those of us going after him. Moving on, another rookie running back I wanted to mention to finish off the E-tier list. DeAndre Swift. DeAndre Swift, you just got to put on the tape. You look up DeAndre Swift, Georgia highlights 2019. Put on the tape. Put on the 2018 tape against Alabama. That's what I went and watched. My goodness, is he an incredible running back. But he's dealing with some injuries this offseason. It's going to take him a while to win the job from Kerryon Johnson. But once he does, he's not giving it back. He's a 3-down back with the capabilities of the passing game. They haven't had a capable receiving back since Theo Riddick a couple years back in Detroit. If and when DeAndre Swift wins this job, he is going to be far and away one of the better offensive pieces in the National Football League. He could have the upside of jumping a couple tiers. We'll just have to wait and see. Moving on. We're talking about the F tier. Now, the F tier list, in my opinion, are guys that are going to start or are going to eventually just have a bunch of touches. Now, I don't know if Adrian Peterson can play the entire year, but Adrian Peterson, just going back to 2018, was a 1,000-yard running back. When Darius Guice went down, he stepped in and he ran for over 1,000 yards that season and was a top 24 running back. Going into this upcoming season, it's kind of a similar situation, but there's other running back talent there. You have Antonio Gibson. You still have Bryce Love. You still have Peyton Barber. Are there, going to be are they going to just rotate? If they do, it's going to decrease Adrian Peterson's value. But overall, I think he's going to be the starting running back of this team. Starting week 1, could present some value there. Moving on, another running back, Jordan Howard. Jordan Howard, again, similar to Adrian Peterson, a 1,000-yard running back in 2018, a very capable running back. Even this past season, from weeks 1 through 9, was the number 15 overall running back for the Philadelphia Eagles. He goes to the Miami Dolphins, which has been horrible in terms of running the ball last season. I mean, the leading rusher for the Miami Dolphins last year, Ryan Fitzpatrick. That's correct. Pretty shocking numbers there. But regardless, Jordan Howard's going to be the starter, going to get the goal line work, and hopefully can find some success behind an below average offensive line. We're just going to have to wait and see. Regardless, moving on. Kerryon Johnson. Like I mentioned with DeAndre Swift is eventually going to lose the job, but how long will it take? Kerryon Johnson's a very good running back. His injury history has definitely hurt him in the past couple of years in the National Football League, but he is a great running back. Coming out of Auburn, he was a 3-down back that can pass block, catch the ball out of the backfield, and run in between the tackles and deliver hits. Kerryon Johnson's capable, but if in fact he gets injured, we're going to potentially see a little bit of a drop-off this upcoming season. All right, moving on. We're going to go ahead and talk about Phillip Lindsay. Phillip Lindsay, though Melvin Gordon is in the C tier and is probably going to be the starting running back, Phillip Lindsay has potential upside value this upcoming season because he's been an RB1 in this backfield before. He knows the offense. He is a capable receiving back, and he doesn't need more than 15, not even 15. He doesn't need more than 10 touches to be a viable play. Because of his capabilities of being a breakout runner or getting work in the passing game and even getting some work in terms of breaking off for a touchdown, it'll only take 10 touches a game for Phillip Lindsay to be a flex play that's going to be a 10-point per guy on average per weekend. That's what I'm expecting, and that's what I'm hoping for a guy like Phillip Lindsay this upcoming season. All right, moving on. And again, with Melvin Gordon's injury history, Phillip Lindsay could end up, just taking the full job if Melvin Gordon gets injured. Moving on. The G tier. We're talking about Marlon Mack. Far and away, I think Marlon Mack was a guy that prior to the draft was going to be considered a top 15 back because of what this offense is capable of, what the rushing, upside was with touchdowns. It should have all been great for Marlon Mack, but he goes into his final year of his contract. They draft a brand new rookie running back, and it's kind of looking like they're trying to move away from Marlon Mack, and that's probably what they'll do. Though he'll get some touches here and there, and he is a capable running back, he's not going to be what he's been in the past. He is more of a handcuff situation with the potential upside of in a good matchup. If they play against the Jacksonville Jaguars, I wouldn't mind starting, Jonathan Taylor and Marlon Mack week 1 because I do think both of them are going to rip off for 15-plus rushing attempts in that game. But eventually, when it gets tighter and they have to stop running the ball and it's Phillip Rivers time, we get Nyheim Hines in there. That's when Marlon Mack falls off because he's not a receiving back. Moving on. Other running backs that are in an RBBC kind of situation, Tevin Coleman. We talked about Raheem Mostert earlier, but Tevin Coleman is a capable running back and has a lot of upside in the passing game and can, on a weekly basis, if given the opportunity, have 15 rushing attempts and produce. We've seen it done last season. I mean, he had a game of 4 touchdowns last year. He's had games that in this offense are just ridiculous numbers. With the fact that the 49ers offense wants to run the ball about 31 times a game like they did last season with their offensive line and their entire scheme, it looks like Tevin Coleman can still be a decent flex play in a good matchup this upcoming season, and that's why I value him in this G tier. Moving on, another RBBC-ish running back. Again, all of the D tier running backs, their backups are pretty much sitting here in G, because again, this is where the value is going to be broken off. That's why the D tier running backs aren't in the C or B tier this upcoming season, regardless. J.K. Dobbins, the second round pick out of Ohio State, a running back that really didn't have to deal with much in college. It looked like breakaway runs. It looked like he was at a track meet. No one wanted to tackle him, and no one could stop him. Regardless, he joins an offense that, again, like I mentioned before with Mark Ingram, is one of the most talented run blocking attacks in the National Football League, and he's probably going to fill in as the RB2. And the fact that he is a capable receiving back, he'll fill in just nicely and take all of Gus Edwards' potential production from last year. Gus Edwards over 100 rushing attempts, had 700 rushing yards, averaged 5 yards per carry. I think it was 5.5 yards per carry. All in all, J.K. Dobbins, pretty good option this year in terms of upside at the running back position. Moving on, similar to David Montgomery in D tier, we have ourselves Tariq Cohen in G tier. Let's not forget that Tariq Cohen, now that we have a little bit of an injury with David Montgomery this upcoming season, let's not forget that Tariq Cohen can run in between the tackles. I understand he's not the most capable back, but if you give him 100 rushing attempts, he'll run for 400 yards. He can average 4 yards per carry in the National Football League, on top of the fact that in the last 2 seasons, he's had 71 and 79 total receptions. PPR, half PPR, great numbers, great upside this upcoming year. G-tier player. Moving on, we have Zach Moss. I talked about Devin Singletary on that fringe, but Zach Moss can definitely come in and play the Frank Gore role. I mean, Frank Gore, prior to Devin Singletary coming back and kind of winning the job, Frank Gore was averaging 10, 15 fantasy points per game on that 3-week stretch early in the season. And if Frank Gore can do that, far and away, Zach Moss is capable. Zach Moss is a capable 3-down back, and I do think they drafted him to come in to help this offense. He's not going to come and just sit on the bench and watch Devin Singletary, because he's just as capable, if not better, than Devin Singletary. It's just a matter of time until we see how this entire offense kind of breaks down. Moving on to the H tier. We're coming at it, but here we go. Latavius Murray. Latavius Murray is an interesting running back at this point. He is pretty much a handcuff with upside because, again, he can touch the ball 10 times a game, and if he touches the ball and he ends up breaking off a run, getting into the end zone, catching a couple balls, that's where he can find his potential value. Moving on, Justin Jackson. Like I've mentioned before, Melvin Gordon is going to be absent, and there's going to be a lot of touches in this offense. Joshua Kelly doesn't look like he's winning this second job, and Austin Eckler is going to need some help because, again, a smaller running back, sure, I do think that he could potentially live with 275 touches this year and be perfectly healthy. But they're going to give Justin Jackson an opportunity. He will find value there and be a handcuff at the same time. Moving on, we have Damian Harris. Now, though you could have Sony Michel here, I do think regardless, the starting running back of the New England Patriots grants a lot of value. The Patriots have given the ball to their running backs more than just about any team in the last 3 years in terms of receptions and rushing attempts overall. They're going to give their starting running back 200 plus rushing attempts and a lot of goal line work, especially with a mobile quarterback like Cam. It opens up a lot. And I think if Damian Harris, if all the hype this offseason during training camp is going to stay consistent, we have ourselves an Alabama running back who started over Josh Jacobs, who is in a Belichick offense that could be running all over people this year. The offensive line gets better with their center coming back. They've got a pretty clean group there. We'll just have to wait and see. Either way, Damian Harris, H tier. Moving on. Matt Breida, similar to Jordan Howard. Matt Breida is going to come in and take the pass break. Jordan Howard is not a capable receiving back, but Matt Breida has had games in San Francisco over the last couple of years in which he comes in and dominates. All in all, I think he has the potential just being that handcuff with upside kind of play. But all in all, not too excited, but he is a running back. Let's put it that way. Moving on. Duke Johnson, starting off with the I tier. These are guys that are handcuffs with PPR ability. I think Matt Breida, he is PPR capable, but he's not going to end a game with 6 receptions. That's very unlikely at this current juncture of the Miami Dolphins offense. But if Duke Johnson finishes a game with 6 receptions and has the upside of filling in for David Johnson's injuries, we have ourselves a conversation there in which Duke Johnson may be worth owning. And that's why he sits in the very bottom tier. Moving on, another running back, Nyheim Hines. I mentioned him a little bit earlier for a reason, because Nyheim Hines is going to be the Austin Eckler of the Colts offense. Let's not forget Nyheim Hines, a track star, a receiver in college, a guy that ran a 4.3 at the combine, is going to be incredible in the passing game when, in fact, Phillip Rivers calls his number and needs to get some extra yards, finish off drives, come back in game, 2-minute drills, anything of that nature. Because, again, even though Jonathan Taylor showed a lot of improvement in terms of his final year at Wisconsin in the passing game, Jonathan Taylor and Marlon Mack are not going to be asked to catch the ball out of the backfield. It's going to be Nyheim Hines. He'll get some work on the ground. Should be a great play this upcoming season. The last running back I wanted to mention on today's list, Antonio Gibson. If Antonio Gibson's hype this offseason continues, he keeps working hard, kicking ass, taking names, he's going to potentially take Adrian Peterson out and supplant him as the starter of this Washington football team. All in all, Antonio Gibson has got a lot of hype behind him. I'm hoping he's capable in this offense. There's not a lot of opportunity for running back play, especially with the game scripts that they're going to be at. So maybe a receiving back is something they're going to look at. They don't have Chris Thompson. Maybe Antonio Gibson can play that role. There it is, everybody. We have finished my 2020 tier list. It took us just about 40 some odd minutes, but thank you everybody for watching. Again, if you like today's video, you like all the content I've created, all the little tidbits I had on these players, click that like button, smash it, comment down below. What do you guys think about today's tier list going into the 2020 season? Thank you everybody for watching. I really do appreciate it. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.